Hello, everyone. My name is Max Boykin. I am the manager of the Save HIV Funding Campaign, and I am so happy to have you to be a part of our second in our series around how in which we continue to have our summer of advocacy. Our first training was around legislator engagement, and this one is about creating community teach-ins. Some of you may have created community teach-ins in the past. Some of you may have never heard of the word teaching a day in your life. But thank you so very much for taking space and time to join us today. To be a part of this. I do want to let everyone know this is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube and to the Save HIV Funding website to allow for folks to also continue to see these trainings in the future. If you would not like to have your face or your image within the telecast that we do have on YouTube, feel free to just take your video off screen. With that, we have some amazing speakers here to hear from and talk about how in which we create community teach-ins. And so I want to ask everyone in the chat if you don't mind letting folks know and just as like, hey, if you have ever participated in a teach-in, if you have ever helped organize a teach-in, if you have ever been a part of or heard of it in the past, feel free to put that in the chat now. Again, just if you have been a part of a teach-in, if you've never heard of a teach-in, that is also okay to put in the chat. The chat will also not be on the telecast. So just letting folks know. But if you're interested in if you're never been a part of a teach-in, if you have been a part of a teach-in, if you've organized one, please feel free to put that in the chat. And if you've also never even heard of teach-in before this particular moment, that is completely okay. With that, I've already introduced myself, but I want to give a couple of our panelists a chance to also introduce themselves before I go into more about what a teach-in is and why we're using this in this moment. And I will actually pass it off to the person who may not remember bringing this up and why we're having a piece around teach-ins, but brought this up on one of our first mobilizing, organizing, and action calls. Crystal with PWN.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Max. My name is Crystal. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the organizing director at Positive Women's Network USA, and I'm based out of Houston, Texas. And I'm so happy to share with you some of the things we have used and what we've learned. Like Max, Andy, myself, we all want to make sure like this space is accessible, and you do not need to come to this space with knowing everything. There's a lot that we are still learning, but what we do know, we want to share with you, and we want to make sure that this space is a space where you feel comfortable asking questions. So we'll have more space for questions at the end. So I'll pass it to Andy, or I'll pass it back to Max.
That's all good. Andy, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good morning, y'all, for those of us on the West Coast, and good afternoon for folks in other parts of the country. So, my name is Andy Stone. I am Director of Community Mobilization and Policy at the San Francisco AIDS Foundation, and I've been an organizer around LGBT rights and HIV communities for the past 15 years. And really excited to be here with y'all today to talk a little bit more about how we organize teach-ins and maybe some tools and tips and tricks that you can take with you as you organize and mobilize your community locally and plug in more to the fight that we're organizing nationally. So thanks for having me. Good to see all your wonderful faces.
Thank you so very much, Andy. And thank you, Crystal, for also setting the stage here. With that, a teaching is considered a particular form, typically held and historically held on college campuses, but nowadays that is not the case. They actually come back from a history, coming back all the way to the 60s, where the first one was done at the University of Michigan, where it was actually a way to have students and community members understand why there was so much pushback against the Vietnam War. And it was started as an anti-war movement, and then they took it on the road, and they had teach-ins at universities across the country. This also coincided with the civil rights movement, where there was also a lot of conversations on college campuses about different racist practices that folks were doing, and this was also a way in which they also helped recruit new SNCC members into movement. This was also a way in which a lot of young people coming out, especially baby boomers coming out of the 60s and 70s, actually first engaged in movement in space. They may have seen something on television, but their first actual activation was, for many folks, was a teaching, was an opportunity to talk about how in which these practices continue, how in which they can talk about the anti-war movement, what it meant in that space, but also you would hear from sometimes professors, but you also heard from directly impacted folks, folks who were either drafted into the war or had to go fight in Vietnam. And you would hear the different sides from folks of like what this meant and what this impact showed up. And then there was also always a call to action at the end. And that is a very important part of any teaching is also what is that call to action? What gets people to take movement? And those are some of the things that we want to make sure that we're also moving within teachings moving forward. Um, Another piece, as folks also think about like why are teachings really important? It's a regular everyday way, and we use the term teaching loosely at times, but it's a way to just educate folks on what's going on. Uh, Many times we have our Save HIV funding calls that are weekly. They can be seen very high level, and if you don't know the difference between rescissions, appropriations, it can become very very hard. And teachings are made to make sure that everyday folks are understanding what's going on. They were originally geared very much for students, but I have also been a part of teachings. My first ones were in Chicago. My first one was at the University of Chicago, but I also held them in places like Home and Square, in parks and neighborhoods, where it was free of access for people to be able to actually have access to these things. We wanted to make sure that folks are able to make sure that they're able to have that. And some of the things that we think about when we're thinking about steps to creating a teaching is formalizing or having a group that is the organizing committee of it. It is important to have a group of folks that are organizing the actual teaching itself. And then you also want to recruit some speakers. Typically, those can be someone that is, especially understanding what we're dealing with right now, is dealing with the legislative backlash, people that are knowledgeable of the appropriations package, of the bills that are coming out of the executive orders that are impacting people, but also have an understanding of the local impact. I think that is very important, and what you'll hear from some of the folks as they're talking about some of their teachings is local impact is truly important for folks. It's not enough just to talk about how this impacts people nationally. We have to talk about how this also impacts people on the local level. And what you'll hear from some of our speakers is how in which that also shows up. So it's always important to recruit speakers. And what I also, this can include elected officials, this can include faith leaders or advocates. I always want to make sure, especially using meaningful involvement of people living with HIV or MIPA is important also within this process of making sure that people that are directly impacted by these cuts are also are having their voices heard throughout that process as well. You should also select a moderator or a facilitator for the space, and that is to make sure that so the speakers know they can cut the time, someone's keeping track of time, and this can also be split within the folks that are also organizing it. And something also that's important is to assess the diversity, equity, and inclusion, or how in which this is to be an inclusive space. I always want to make sure that these are inclusive spaces, and also making sure that it's ADA accessible is also something that is truly important for folks as they are coming into these spaces. I have seen teach-ins be as short as an hour and as long as 4 to 5 hours. And that is also on like how long and how much crowd participation, how much community participation that you are allowing for this, and also how many people that you can like facilitate, particularly in small groups. I've seen teach-ins as small as 15 people, and I've seen teach-ins as big as a couple thousand. Like we did a teach-in Chicago at Chicago State University when there was big budget cuts. And what we've also seen is teach-ins are really good of teaching people how budgets show up. Budgets can be real complicated things, but allowing for people to like see and also feel at times how in which these budgets cuts would impact people is an important place of understanding how in which we are able to come together. And it's important to make sure, especially if there's if there's potentially people having language barriers. That is also a really important thing for you to be able to have space for. If you need technology or help in making sure that people can fully understand the different languages that people may speak in the space. And you also want to make sure that people of different identities feel comfortable within that space, and that's important as we call the pre-event logistics or also the recruiting of an event, which are both like making sure understanding who your audience is. And that's also the audience is important to understand what type of language that you're using. And when I say language, I'm not just talking about if you're using English, Spanish, or French, but actually are you going to use acronyms? I always say is like it's very important when doing teach-ins to not use acronyms. And what are the things that we also is like how accessible is it? Some people will talk about doing teach-ins that are only allowed for people in physical space. Some people may have physical teach-ins that are used for people that are hybrid in that people can join virtually, and they may have a purely virtual teach-ins, and we'll talk about that as well, where folks are using them more on Zoom or Facebook Live, while other ones, and depending on different communities, where it is just a closed live space for people to be able to engage in. Along with that is what type of space do you need? How many people are you actually willing to actually hold in the space? I've also done teach-ins where they've been outside all day, and that comes with its own struggles, but at times it allows for a lot more space and for folks that are just coming by the park or just coming through in the community to be able to just, pop in and see what's going on and hear more and make it even more accessible. While weather is always a factor when you also do anything outdoors is something to also think about. And when doing it internal of the space is also like people's safety is also important and in different levels of this. I have seen these hosted by some of the biggest organizations, big, huge nonprofits, or they're hosted by just community members. A couple community members at a church want to be able to talk about how in which this budget or other things that are happening within their community are impacting them, and allow folks to be able to have them. Some people would sometimes teach-ins are akin to town halls or other type of community events. A teach-in does have a very specific piece of like teaching people something. If it's teaching about how the budget is impacting them, how their local budget is connected also to their federal budget, how in which ICE raids are also potentially like impacting or showing up in their community. These are all important in different ways to show and show up and show ways that we can do different types of teach-ins. And they can also be around like different topics. And like I said, the original and first one of these was coming out of the anti-war movement. But many people have been doing forms of teach-ins in their local churches or community groups in a lot of different ways by just forming and having a space for people to talk through what's going on. You also want to be able to make sure that you are creating an agenda and creating an agenda that set guidelines for how and which participation will be done, potential for icebreakers. Also, always want to have time for Q&A, and or different like breakouts of group discussions. And we'll potentially have some folks speaking, and I'll talk a little bit around also my like Fulton County experience with this as well. A huge part is the community outreach is a huge part of this, and then testing your technology. if you are using a technology, and especially if you're using headphones or microphones, speakers, testing those out a little bit before, always important. And then it's also important to amplify your event. And one of the most important pieces is also a follow-up. I will also drop in the chat for folks is a guide. This is an Earth Day guide actually around it because since it being used in anti-war movements and around civil rights, it has also been used around environmental justice. It's been used around HIV work. It's been used around under domestic violence issues and other pieces, and people also using this around different violence that shows up in their community to actually educate the folks in the community of what's going on, and then also understanding how they can address those pieces. Um, it's also important to connect what you're doing locally to what is also happening federally, and then at times also how in which that is showing up in a global context. And if you don't feel comfortable speaking about this, this is why one of the most important is also how in which you recruit people to be a part of this work. We understand, and the thing that I want to also add in this particular context is we have things that we are understanding that we've never seen before coming out of the federal government. And when people start talking about reconciliation, appropriations, and recessions, those get kind of confusing. And some of those words start to sound very similar. So how do I define teaching? It sounds like a no, I would say so. I want to a teach-in is a forum typically held and it's used for extended discussion around a specific social or political issue. That is the most like baseline generic version of way of teaching is. It's pretty much taking what is typically done in a classroom and taking it out to the masses and making sure that community level folks actually have access to be able to understand what they are doing. And then the big part to me about teach-ins is there has to be an action step added at the end to make sure that folks are able to understand what type of actions they can do to address what was talked about in the teach-in. I hope that is better to answer your question, Gerald. Um, with that, I also want to open it up to our wonderful guest speakers around how in which this shows up for them. And with that, I want to invite Andy and Crystal and to speak around and the first question around this teaching question air is why? Why did you have teachings in the first place? And why were you trying to bring people together? And Andy, you mind kicking us off?
Yeah, happy to hop in. Thank you for all of that background info, Max, to kind of help get us grounded in what is a teach-in. And I'll say we usually so I help coordinate a group called the HIV Advocacy Network, and we have a couple of folks here on the call today joining us from Han here in the Bay Area. But we usually do a city budget campaign where we're fighting for funding in the city budget for people living with and impacted by HIV. And our budget teach-in is one of the kickoffs of our campaign. This is a great way for us to come together as a community to learn about the issues in a more in-depth and democratic way, and make sure that we all have the information that we need to be able to be successful advocates. Also, one of the things that I love, like I would differentiate between an advocate training, let's say, and a teach-in is the democratic nature of a teach-in. Like teach-in is for us is a very horizontal process. We have many people in the community who, from different perspectives, whether they be frontline HIV workers, whether they be people living with HIV, people from at-risk communities, policy experts, whoever it may be, coming and presenting on multiple different topics connected to the city budget campaign. These are usually pop-up presentations that kind of happen. So think like 2 to 3 minutes where we share some important background information about an issue, and then we open the door for a conversation if folks who have joined us have things that they want to ask or dive deeper into it. This whole process is just really enriching, I think, because it helps people recognize all of the different levels of expertise that we hold as community members, whether that be from, not only a policy expertise or epidemiological perspective or, wonky budget stuff, but also like the real lived experience that people have and the texture that they bring to the conversation is this is what's happening day to day around whatever issue it may be, HIV housing or PrEP access or any other kind of issue that we're advocating for. And it's really empowering, right? Because it helps us to build leadership at the same time and skills at the same time that we're all learning collectively together. And that really helps, I think, build a much stronger movement and foundation for mobilizing around the issues that we're advocating for. So I'll pause there.
Thank you so very much, Andy. And Crystal, same question is like, why have you either created or participated in teachings in the past, and what did you need in order to prepare for your teachings?
Yeah, thanks for this question. Something as I'm reading through the chat, I think it's really important to say. A lot of us have done a teaching without calling it a teaching. And that still makes it so. Okay. So the most recent thing we did at Positive Women's Network, and for anyone who doesn't know, PWN is the only national membership body created by and for women that's trans and cisgender women, gender diverse folks, transgender people living with HIV. We're the only one in the country. And so a lot of times we are organizing on a national level and at a local level. With the recent attacks on Medicaid and everything happening in the national landscape, we had to really pause and say, hey, we need to find a better way to get information out to our members instead of emails and collectively take action. One thing that was really important to us is a lot of times it's intimidating to do some of these actions. It's better to do it collectively as a group. So the lowest lived thing that was that we didn't really see already floating around, we saw a lot of calls to action to email your reps. But we said, and shout out to our policy director, Kelly Flannery, who's not here. I'm glad she's resting. So she's been working her ass off. And over since the beginning of the year, she's been paying attention to how things have been going down. And so we really knew it was important to get our membership together and to take action together. And so we did an action hour where we all got on a Zoom because we are organizing in a virtual remote setting. And we just called our legislators. And so before we got people on the phones with their reps, we wanted to host a teach-in so everybody can be on the same page about like what is actually going on. There's been so much information coming at us. Let's all make sure that we're up to date with the latest that's happening with the cuts to Medicaid, and then we will all take action together. So that's one of the teaching moments that we have recently had, and you all know what's been happening nationally. Like we all know it's everybody's voice is needed right now. So.
Thank you so very much for that, Crystal. Um, I also want, as you are deciding about virtual versus hybrid versus in person, what are some of the questions that y'all are asking yourselves as folks that have helped organize these spaces before pushing those out? And then what are and how in which you are recruiting for these different events? Crystal, you want to kick us off first?
Yeah, I can kick us off. And I see some of our PWN folks here too. So feel free to like get in the chat, share from your perspective. But for that first question, which was like, what was important for us to really um what did we need in order to prepare? What was that first question, Max?
How are you deciding between the virtual, hybrid, or in-person space? And then
Hmm.
how did you recruit for those once you made that decision?
Okay, so um, our organization is a remote organization. Everyone works from home. And so it just makes sense that we do something virtual so we can bring more people together. We have members across the country from East Coast, West Coast, South, North. So it just makes sense for us to host something virtually. A lot of times, if we're organizing locally, we can do it in person. But for this specific example that I named earlier, we did it virtually. And so some things that we needed is a way for people to sign up to register for the action hour. Um, you all might use Zoom, a registration link from Zoom. We use a platform called Mobilize. Um, but there is not one way to do it. Like some folks go old school, like texting people, writing names down on a sheet and then like sending them a text. Like it, that is still valid. But for us, it's easier to use a platform like Mobilize because it helps to keep people on the same page. That's how we recruited folks and communicated with folks. And yeah, I'm happy to drop the link to our Mobilize because we would love for folks to take action with us and also like see what an example of what that looks like. But I'll pause there and then pass it to Andy.
Yeah, so this is a really great, I think, perspective for folks because Crystal is talking about organizing virtually through a national network of advocates. And with Han, we're much more geographically centered in San Francisco, which is also in and of itself quite a compact city. We love to do our events. In person because for us, like it just makes more sense. We're more geographically closer, more closely located geographically. And we are able to get together. And for us, I think a lot of there has been a feeling of wanting to connect with each other in person and build some of those really strong relationships over food or, little chit chat before and after the event. And that is really helpful to be in person for. Having said that, a lot of our events we do are actually hybrid. We try really hard to also create a virtual component for folks who, for whatever reason, may not be able to join us in person. Maybe they're sick that day, or maybe they live in Oakland, which, if you're not familiar with the Bay Area, it's pretty close, but it's still like a 45 minute commute via the metro, the BART. So it can be a lot for folks, especially if they've had a really long day. So we do try to make it much more accessible in that way, but generally ours are hybrid. Some of the biggest things for us when we're thinking about this are, do we have the capacity to be able to do that, right? Do we have the folks who can coordinate the Zoom meeting in addition to doing all of the stuff in person? So we don't always do a hybrid event. We do sometimes just do in-person teach-ins. Another thing to think about is the context in which we're organizing. If we, for example, this past week, we did a big day of action with our city budget where we had an advocate training teach-in in the morning. And then after that, we marched and rallied and went over to City Hall to have meetings with different constituent meetings with members of our local city council, our board of supervisors. And for that, it just made a lot more sense to only do it in person because we're about to march and rally, and a lot of the training is really connected to the meetings that we're having later in the evening. Some things that we kind of like to take into account when doing our teach-ins is we like to think about what are the needs of our folks who would want to attend this, right? Are we engaging folks much further out than San Francisco? If so, maybe we do want to have a virtual component. Again, I mentioned the capacity issue. Do we have someone who can be a Zoom captain, for example, and help us coordinate the questions that are coming in from Zoom in addition to coordinate the actual event in person? Do we want to have this in person to be able to build relationships and connections in between the training and before and after? These are some other things that we're kind of thinking about as we're thinking what the medium of the event is going to look like.
Thank you so very much, Crystal and Andy, for that piece. I do want to go to one of the questions in the chat before going back to this piece. Well, and it helps actually. It's like, what does the flow of the day typically look like for you? I think some of you have talked about some of the piece, but particularly some of the pre-work that y'all do in getting the space together. If it's ordering the food, making sure the Zoom and microphones are working right, checking in with some of the speakers. What are some of the things that you must do beforehand? And then also some of the after part of the events. What do you have to do to make sure that the event goes well in y'all's mind? And Andy, you kick this one off.
Awesome. Super happy to do that. So, I also, if I can for just a second, tie in another question. Shout out to Maggie. How do you make a teach-in feel more horizontal or democratic, as I mentioned? And so I think this is a great tie-in to your question, Max. One of the things that we like to do to make this more horizontal and democratic is we open it up to our community. We usually have like a process where people are going through and doing their own research separately and then collectively based on like them volunteering. They're like, I want to learn more about this issue. I want to dive into this issue more deeply. So I'm going to do my research. I'm going to bring it back. We're all going to talk about it together. I'm going to prepare a little mini presentation as part of this bigger teach-in, right? So one of the ways that we make this more horizontal and more democratic is we give roles to folks in our community, both our leadership team and individual members who want to step up and take on a specific role related to the teach-in. So we have presenters, as I mentioned. We also have folks who do, like the Zoom captaining. We have folks who do like running around with the mic. We have folks who take on other important roles that allow them to be more involved in pulling the event together. So, in terms of preparation, for us, it's really important in giving everyone that voice to support people in that process. So, we also usually do a check in pre event to make sure that folks feel comfortable with their presentations. We create some template slides for people to use to plug in their information. If they have questions, we help support them to feel more comfortable. We also do one on one check ins with our folks about different roles. We meet a little early to check in and make sure everyone feels comfortable with their role and is prepared to hold whatever role that they take on. Other things to think about, as with any event, you've got to make sure that you have a space if you're doing it in person or a Zoom link if you or whatever virtual platform you're using if you're going to do this virtually. So making sure that that stuff is prepared. We also, if we do an in-person event, always try to have food for folks because we know that, folks are oftentimes coming straight from work. Maybe we don't want folks to choose between whether they're gonna, not eat and go to this training or, eat and miss the training, right? We want to make sure our folks are supported in that way. In terms of preparation, I think we also try to make sure that there's a clear call to action, as Max has mentioned in the past. We're doing all of this work, and what is it for, right? We're doing this big teach-in, and what is it leading folks to, right? How are we not only information sharing and learning together, but why are we learning, and what is that? What is the way that we are using this opportunity to build our people power in order to effectuate change? Like, how are we activating our community to put pressure on key decision makers in order to achieve our goals? So that's also another really clear component that we think about as we're organizing the logistics for our day of action, or I mean our teach-ins. Sorry.
And I love how you also that Freudian slip of the day of action is typically also when having teach-ins is also guiding people towards having days of action. We also did a similar piece for Illinois is having these different spaces, leading them towards a larger day of action, and to bring more people towards even larger species. Something to also look up for future pieces also ties ins of teach-ins and people movement assemblies. I am not going to go into the in-depth of the differences of those today, but how in which they also can build into one another. Crystal, I
And I
want,
also,
yeah.
sorry, Max, one last little thing. I also noticed something. Someone asked, like, how do you prepare given this moment for in-person events, given this moment with ICE raids and targeting of our communities? And I wanted to just say a little piece about that. One of the things that we do because we hold a lot of in-person events is we have very clear signage around what is private space and what is open to the public. And we always have a registration point at the front door. So if an ICE agent, so basically we have prepared if there is a situation in which ICE tries to come into one of our events, we have clearly designated spaces that are private versus public. ICE is not allowed in private spaces. So that's one thing that we do. We have that signage and we have a check-in person who makes sure that they're checking folks in. And if an ICE agent were to come, there's a protocol where those folks would obviously talk to me as one of the organizers, and I would get in charge. I would get in touch with some of our organizational leadership and attorneys in order to make sure that folks' rights are being protected as best as we can.
Thank you for that, Andy, and thank you for answering that question. I want to pass it over to Crystal. Also, talk about what you also work on in getting set up for the event, but also what are you also thinking about in follow up in the event, and if you also wanted to add any more piece to also that safety question, also given the conversation y'all had within PWN last week.
Yeah. So looking at the chat and listening to the conversation, it seems like people are like clear on how to, because a part of this is, it feels like you're throwing an event, especially if you're doing it in person. Like, so anything you would need to throw an event, you would need to do it for your teaching. The main thing with your teaching is to begin with the end in mind. That is, where are people going? Where are you trying to drive people to take action? Um, that is the end goal. So for us, after you all essentially, like, we're having a teaching right now. After this event, we would hope that you host your own teach-in around some issue that y'all are seeing in your community. There are so many issues to organize and collaborate with. So that is the goal. Get involved, get plugged in. You would need food. You would need to prepare your presenters. Um, Whatever that looks like for y'all, it's no different from a teaching. I know we're using a lot of jargon, but I just want to kind of like assure you all that if you have planned an event, you can do this. Um, I saw this really good question in the chat around like even this question around for physical teach-ins, do we need to budget for participants and transport reimbursement or data reimbursement for virtual ones? Something that this reminds me of is um, I think Andy touched on this, but I want to kind of highlight this. Your teaching is not just a lecture. It is to take all of the knowledge in the room and trusting that people who are in the room have the answers. Like Andy and I do not need to know everything. I don't know what you mean when you say data reimbursement. So I'm going to ask you, what does that mean? And then like we are building as we're going. So I want you all to leave this with the understanding that the the end goal is always to get us to like that call to action. And so sometimes, and I want to shout out and bring Kevin into the room, Kedwin Chadwin Davis, because he was supposed to be a presenter And one thing he reminded me of, because we just planned a big advocacy day in Texas where we hosted like trainings leading up to the advocacy day. And sometimes, and I know some of y'all are on the in the chat. I see y'all in the chat. I'm not going to name y'all because we're recording. I don't know if y'all want to be named, but sometimes it is easy to get lost in the um minutia of planning details. Like who's going to do this and and you have a vision in your mind about how this thing should look and lose focus of the end goal. It's so easy for us to do that and get overwhelmed and stressed. But I want to assure you that if you keep the focus in mind, keep the end in mind, you will get there. And yes, it will take some organizing, some calls, some planning, but you can get there. So I want to ask, like, what do you mean when you say data reimbursement? What does that mean? I don't know if you can come off mute.
I don't know who actually put that in the chat, but feel free to answer that in the chat, or you can come off mute. One thing I did want to add into, particularly around the safety conversation within it, is we have had spaces where it was also clearly people that were undocumented were also definitely invited to be in the space. I think one is to have a set within your organizing committee is also people that are also just in charge of quote unquote like security. One of the most important things in-person events is definitely having a sign-in sheet. Some people make sure that you can sign on Mobilize or other pieces beforehand, but to also still have a physical sign-in sheet or like where they can sign up on a laptop or a tablet to make sure that you know who's also in the room, and just checking in on folks. We also and it can be done in small groups or like a large discussion, like we recently did in a Fulton County, just so everyone knows who's in the room. And that also lets a little like I was like okay, and also like name the organizations that you are a part of. It helps also with a networking and having folks understand who is in the space. And you can also do it in a different way of like icebreakers to not take up as much time in the meeting, to make sure that folks have that space. I also was able to share the agenda from the HIV community meeting, which was a form of a teach-in that was done here last week in Fulton County. Shout out to Daniel Driffin and Alicia McKinley Beach who put that together. And it was over 4 hours. And it was actually like a community potluck when it came down to the food. We did make sure that everyone had an opportunity to introduce themselves, and we also there was a level of when folks were able to even go into their smaller breakouts to talk about like imagining or reimagining what is possible for us to also help in the HIV epidemic in Fulton County. One of the things that they were able to also do is people to have connections with each other in their small groups, also before getting back into the larger group. So folks know who's all again in the room and who was in the small groups. And also you could still check in with who's all that's still in the space. And if folks had to leave, there's also folks that are checking in to know folks have left. And in different spaces, depending on the size of just making sure that folks are able to also get back to their homes in a safe way. So that is also a way having that security, quote unquote, or just checking in with folks, and being a part of the event space is always helpful when having a teach-in. And I want to also shout out what Jeremiah said in the chat, which is we don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Having these spaces is a good thing. We want to continue to have these spaces. We just want to make sure that we're doing and using some of the links that we've shared to make sure that it can be as safe as possible, and also, as people have said, horizontal as possible. I want to also see if folks want to, it's making sure that people that are directly impacted actually have a voice and are a part of the organizing committee, but also a part of who is speaking. And then also having multiple either like facilitators or moderators to be able to make sure the whole room is able to share the space. And I've also done these where we don't have like a quote unquote stage for the presenters, and it is more like it is more horizontal in feeling that everyone is on the same level and in which in way they are presenting and speaking to one another. Um, I do want to open it up if there are other questions that folks have. You are also free to come off mute if you would like to ask your question. Okay, I just got one. Do numbers matter in a teaching, or can one or two people make an impact? Yes, I think that I've been in them where they've been as small as like 10 folks show up for it, and you're able to go much deeper into conversation and understand like what's going on and being able to be clear on all the advocates in the room of what actions they need to be able to take moving from that. I think on the I've also had them again, thousands of people like we had at Chicago State a couple years ago. And that also meant that we had to have more designated facilitators, more folks to be able to actually support it. It's always also important. I think it's if you can have a sign up sheet beforehand, that folks can sign up online is always helpful so you can actually kind of have a little bit of an idea of who will be there. And I think it's also important to also think about the follow up that you have with individuals as you are also getting them into the teaching. If someone signed up a month ago, and you're having the teach-in, and you haven't talked to them in a month, the chances of them remembering that isn't as much. So having a follow-up emails, but also follow-up calls, I always, it's an important part of organizing, is to go past just the email piece of making sure that folks understand the importance of also them showing up in that space, and then also using social media and other ways to also let folks know what's going on in their community is always great as well. I want to open up to other questions that folks may have. And if I missed anything in the chat, uh, panelists do let me know. Michael Jeremiah also let me know if I'm missing anything that is going on in the chats here. But please, folks, feel free to add your questions.
Did you catch the question about can one or two people make an impact?
Yes.
I thought that
And the answer
you
is
did.
yeah.
Sorry, I zoned out for a second. Okay.
And Gerald, yes, I think a lot of the folks and what the thing is to also understand is this is many of you have done teach-ins in your community. Many of you talk to folks and folks of what's going on. Potlucks are a great way to also do this. And also I know many of you have done this with no budget for transportations. The most recent one we did in Fulton County was definitely a potluck. We had some folks brought in some pieces of continental breakfast and we had Popeyes for lunch. And then folks were able to, some of us grabbed some food afterwards to also to talk through, some of the aftermath of the meeting and also how in which we can also like stay in touch and communicate with each other. I think also having that space for folks to continue to engage with each other is also an important part of the teaching.
Can I share something? And I would invite folks who are attendees to even like continue to share your reflections or tips like you have been doing or like things that haven't been working well that you want like some input on. Like we have Antoinette, who is PWN's National Field Organizer on the call. I see Barb here, who is our training director. So again, like this is a room that's full of knowledge. I see some other folks from the strike force here. Something that comes to my mind is how timely is your teaching? Is this connected to an action that people feel really motivated to do? And I'm asking that because I know that things like food is important and even like reimbursing folks for like their time or transportation. At the same time, I know when we're working in community, when community understands the moment, they are down to fight for their lives. We are down to fight for our own lives. So I think about how often we're doing it. I know, like going back to the action hour we did it in May because there was a lot of budget discussion and we had to, it was weekly, 1 hour action hours weekly. And it was challenging to pivot because of all of the changes that were happening. And then the first one we had more people, and then the second week we had about the same, and then third week it kind of dwindled. So I think something for us to think about moving forward is like, how do we structure this to make sure like community feels prepared to take action and like it's a preparedness is also like, is this something, does this make sense right now? Or do we need to pivot? Something that we also have been thinking about is like our teaching took up a lot of the action time. So we are thinking about like shifting that around. So I see Antoinette's hand come up. So I don't know if you want to add to this.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Hey everyone, my name is Antoinette. I'm the National Tour Organizer at PWN, and I also live in Atlanta. So I'm very much so everywhere and anywhere that I need to be. And right now I'm in a public place, so I'm sorry if it's gonna get a little loud. But Crystal is very aligned with exactly what I was gonna say as far as like reflections once our teaching, quote unquote, but we call it our action hour was finished. Having enough time for our members to actually take action is truly important. But we also want to make sure that they have a foundation to go off of. They understand our fight, our why, and how it will impact not just us nationally, but once we start to, see cuts, it will impact them locally. So some of the things that Crystal named as far as like, you know, what how much space and time we are utilizing to give this background overview does take away time that we can be um, doing our actions, such as making calls or strategizing with one another. So something that we thought about was like maybe we need to have a pre-call before the actual action hour. And in that pre-call, 30 minutes before, we can lay the foundation. And then for the folks who have already been to previous calls, they don't need that foundation. They can just hop on at the top of the hour and be ready to go, be ready to make phone calls, be ready to strategize or hear next action steps. And then something else that I wanted to name fairly quick was our PWN HIV Resist Action Hour stems from a larger program called HIV Resist, which stands for Reclaim, Educate, Strategize, Inspire, Sustain, and Transform. So HIV Resist within the PWN landscape is not just, activities that we plan on doing throughout this year to show that we are actively resisting harmful policies and structures that harm our communities, but it's actually a cultural practice that we are shifting. Like it's not just like I said, it's not just activities, but it's a culture. It's an adaptation. Like how are we sustaining not just ourselves as our staff, but our membership as well? How are we transforming the way that they understand these policies and the way that they believe that they can show up and do things? And oftentimes, what has come up a lot in conversations because we know the world is very harmful presently. We know that Black and Brown folks are closer to the margins and will ultimately be criminalized or policed at a greater risk of other folks. So the way in which we are communicating safety has to look different. If we are encouraging our folks to do local organizing and mobilize on the ground, what resources are in place, or something else that I heard, is like around safety is that, we utilize pods, safety pods, or we utilize Signal to communicate because Signal is safer as far as like what we are sharing amongst our membership. And then having utilizing this is the last point I'm going to make, but having PWN and even your spaces that you all are organizing and be a reliable source of information and being able to meet people where they're at. Because news and media is going to put out, not every news and media outlet is going to put out accurate information or correct information. And the spaces that our members are in, they are hearing things within their community that is not 100% true. So they are showing up into this space with rhetoric that they are carrying or beliefs that they are carrying because they heard it on what they believe to be a reliable source. And a lot of the work that we have to do within our action hour or within our conversations is combating that. It's combating what they are believing about immigrants. It's combating what they are believing about Black and Brown folks. And this is natural. Like there's nothing wrong with this. This is natural. This is things that we see on TikTok, but we have to be able to hold both of those things at the same time in order to really make change and transform, and as well as build solidarity amongst our networks in our community, so that because we know that the overall goal of these people in positions of power is to keep us divided. So how we are making sure to bridge that gap is truly important in real time so that we can have as many folks join our movement and our fight as possible. Obviously, believe that.
Thank you so very much, Antoinette. That was very helpful and very understandable, like how in which y'all tie all these things together. And one thing that I also want to add is like the teaching is typically one of the first parts of getting people mobilized and into action. It is, and that is an important for us to think about. Is like after that is then taking them to more levels of action and taking, and that means having meetings with their legislators. It means also making calls to the legislator, and something to think about in a teach-in is also it only takes a couple minutes to call your legislator. So if you need to take those first 30, 40 minutes to actually explain everything that is important, I do want to go over through. I want to give each of our panelists a chance to say their final thoughts. And then I'm going to read up just like some of the key goals and teach-ins and talk about some of our follow-up. With that, Crystal, final thoughts?
I just want to say thank you all for coming and sharing your time with us today. I'm leaving this space with something new that I'm learning. I've never heard of like data reimbursement in this context. So that's something that I'm thinking about and would love to learn more about. But I want to just kind of really affirm us all that we have everything that we need in this space. There is nothing more that we need in order for us to take action on the things that we know are important and are needed in our community. So I just want you all to take that with you. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Crystal. Andy.
I'll just say, y'all are a beautiful group. It is so awesome to be here in community with y'all, to know that we are um, all over the country mobilizing and organizing at this moment. We are not alone. There is so much power in this room and beyond. Hopefully, folks are taking away some things that may be helpful for them. Again, like the point, one of the, I think, purposes of this training is to empower y'all to organize your own teach-ins, whatever that may look like. And it will be different depending on the context between your local community, the folks that you're trying to organize, and the needs that they have, the resources that you have. But all of this contributes to the movement work that we're doing to build and fight for our communities. And, excited to see how you continue to take all of these things, move it forward. We continue to learn from one another, strengthen our movement. And, we are powerful. We have done this before as a movement, faced, incredible odds in the midst of the state oppression and in the midst of stigma and discrimination. And we have literally transformed the way public health is, structured in this country in ways that literally have saved millions of lives across the world. So thank you for being in this. So excited to see how everyone takes this info, moves forward, and just really appreciate all the work that y'all are doing across the country.
Thank you so very much, Andy. And again, thank you, Crystal, and everyone else who also added questions into the chat. One of the things I want to add to one question that was put, it was like, how long should it be? It's up to you. I've seen them be as short as an hour and a half, as long as 4 to 5 hours. The longer they are, the more that you definitely want to have food. And I also just think about how much time that you can keep people's attention. Think about a classroom. Once the class gets past a certain hour, you ready to go. So that's always something to think about when thinking about the time, but also think about how much time it takes to break down certain things. And like I said about the Fulton County one, there was a lot more time allowed to have small group discussion to talk about and dream of what is possible. And that's also important to think about of what did you want to get out of your goals coming out of the teach-in. So it is up to you, but I've seen them go as short as an hour, as long as 4. Key goals of teach-ins are to educate and inform, information sharing. That's like one of the key ones, but also to have people have critical thinking and reflecting on what is going on and how they can actually engage around it. And another piece is community building, having time and space for folks to learn about who all is in the room, especially when you're having local spaces and allowing people to introduce themselves and talk through what they're doing. And then one of the most important things that I also think about is action and advocacy. People taking action and advocacy. Again, this is one of the first steps of getting people engaged. We then want to have people to doing more engagement with their legislators. We want to have them doing more engagement with their community, and also potentially having a set of escalating tactics, as they were talking about, as we are trying to save HIV funding. Defend Medicaid, and make sure that we're also pushing it back and pushing for our communities that we love and support that are most and directly impacted by HIV to make sure that we can get to a more liberated life. So, and I love the added of like using this advocacy around a national PrEP program. We just had calls around this actually earlier today. This is the type of things that we love to hear. So thank y'all so very much. I think we went a little bit over, but again, thank y'all so very much. We will send out a recording of this and then also let folks have all the different links that we have, including the toolkits around a teach-in, and make sure that you sign up for our future trainings. Thank y'all so very much, and see y'all soon. Enjoy. And start to set up your own teach-ins. And if you have any questions or thoughts about that, reach out to us. And you can definitely reach out to me at max@prepforall.org, and we will give you the support that is needed to have this and other forms of advocacy. Thank you.